Are you looking for an antidote to information overload? Well, at a time when the news cycle is moving faster than ever, The Week is here to help. Our new digital subscription includes a twice-daily digest of the day's most interesting, important stories, along with the liveliest comment and analysis delivered to your app or inbox. Head to theweek.com/offer and use the code SPRING24. That's SPRING24 at theweek.com/offer. Sale ends 6th of May. It's the week ending Friday the 26th of April, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Joe Biden announcing a $61 billion support package for Ukraine, the UK government passing a law to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, and household cavalry horses bolting through central London and all over the internet. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Ollie Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team is Harriet Marsden, from BBC Sport journalist Emma Smith, and we welcome back science and climate journalist Jessica Hullinger. Have any of you yet used the phrase, look between such and such letters on your keyboard? Because that is the real story of the week. I keep seeing it all over social media and I've no idea what it means.
I got done by the look between H and L on your keyboard and then felt very annoyed and like
between H and
disproportionately
L. So
annoyed.
I'm doing that now. It says JK. What does it mean?
That's internet speak for joke.
Have you seen it? Have you not seen this, Harriet? It's everywhere. People say look between U and O.
This is the first I'm hearing of it.
Okay, it's infuriating. It's everywhere, honestly.
I don't understand it either. I have no idea. If this is a Twitter thing, then I am missing it.
Maybe it's just a Twitter thing. That is basically social media for me. So, yes, could be, yeah. People probably aren't doing visual representations of their keyboards on Instagram, Harriet. Maybe that's where you are. You're kicking us off this week. What?
Ooh, sound a bit shady.
No, it's not. I'm not denigrating you. I just assume you're an Insta user. You're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Does an octopus have more feelings than I do?
The octopus offers this perfect balance between something that is so alien, and as humans, we're drawn to the alien. You know, you have this animal with 8 arms, 3 hearts, blue blood, and a beak. But yet, what the series reveals is that octopuses are vulnerable, that they're intelligent, that they have the capacity to feel emotions. And so we're seeing these glimmers of these traits that we might normally only attribute to, say, a chimpanzee or an elephant or a whale.
Marine biologist Alex Schnell talking to Muse TV on Sunday. So octopuses, Harriet, delicious. Why are we talking about them?
Well, we're talking about octopuses and basically all other animals on the planet, all animals, vertebrate and invertebrate. And what's happened this week is a big group of scientists and leading philosophers have signed this declaration, which was published last Friday. So that's the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness. And what they're saying in this declaration is there's strong support for conscious experience in mammals and birds, which obviously is really widely agreed on. And there's at least realistic possibility of conscious experience in all other vertebrates like fish and invertebrates, including insects and cephalopods like octopuses.
Okay, so what's happened to cause this breaking news?
Well, it's essentially they have all come together, all of these philosophers and scientists saying, because there is a realistic possibility and enough evidence to suggest this, it's irresponsible not to consider it. We should use it to inform issues of animal welfare. And what they're not saying is that all animals and insects and octopuses have complex interior lives and are super, super smart. We're talking about flipping the assumption. So rather than assuming that animals aren't conscious or they're not sentient or they don't feel, what the assumption is they're saying is that it should be that they are, and we should come from that point.
Okay. When Harriet says we, Jess, what impact do you think this might have on people listening? what does it matter what a scientist or a group of scientists declare about an animal's sentience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you have to think about like how we rely on animals for a lot of the things that humans do and use and consume, right? So this could have ramifications far and wide, from the food that we eat and how it's produced, to the clothes that we wear, to animal testing on various products. So, if and when you start to take into consideration the feelings of the creature that you are working with or utilizing to produce something, then you might have to think about whether or not you want to continue that action, or if you want to tweak the way that you carry out those actions. For example, if you take animal testing, if we say, okay, actually these animals are conscious and they can feel pain, do we want to carry out animal testing in general? Is that ethical?
I suppose the answer to that question, Emma, might be yes, we do. I eat meat, for example, and I keep chickens as pets. I wouldn't eat the chickens that I keep as pets, but I'm able to say, even though I admire my pets and I have a relationship with them and I think they're sentient, that if another chicken has been well looked after in its life, I'm okay to eat it. I mean, you can have high welfare standards and still think that it's a sentient being.
Yeah, I suppose it's the case of whether or not this new research sort of forces us to adjust the way that we regard animals. I mean, I think as humans we have a sort of a predilection to assign intelligent characteristics to some animals above. Like, we can assign intelligence, for example, to apes and to chimps because we understand sort of their body language, or elements of their body language. There's certain identifiers. There's also a certain amount of bias given by humans to animals that we find cute, like of animals that we have an emotional connection with, like your chickens or Harriet's cat, which we are establishing as having an emotional connection to because it's intelligent enough not to jump all over while we record this podcast, but instead sitting there calmly. But I think it's the difficulty. Yes. But the difficulty, I think, is coming when it comes to something like an octopus, because we have so little sort of to identify with, like the behaviour of an octopus, and sort of the body language of an octopus is so unrecognisable to a human that we therefore have difficulty assigning sort of or understanding that they could have this sort of emotional intelligence, this ability to cognate, which is something that this study is obviously attempting to challenge.
But how might it change our behaviour then, Harriet? So, I mean, Jess speculated at some of the ways, but let's take that example of an octopus. Like I say, I mean, they are delicious. I think they are intelligent. But if they've had a nice life, I don't see how their death really matters whether they're sentient or not.
Well, the octopus is a really good example of this. Like, this is why this declaration is such a big deal, because it's really catching up to what the scientific evidence over the last 20 years has been telling us. So as Emma said, previously it was only really assumed that this kind of sentience or consciousness applied to like great apes, like things like humans, basically. Then there was this big revolution about 20 years ago with corvids, with a lot of studies coming out about crows, ravens, jays, about feathered apes, and how that really upended these ideas, because they were like, well, if it's gone down the bird line, then it could be. And the octopus is very much a new thing, basically. I think that's what I really want to get across, that these studies on octopuses have really actually had a massive impact on legislation in the past couple of years. Like in the UK, for example, octopuses were actually officially legally recognised as sentient beings in the Animal Welfare Bill in 2021. That was after, very famously, My Octopus Teacher won Best Documentary at the Oscars in 2021. So first it was thinking about great apes and chimps, and then it was thinking about corvids and birds and all mammals and all vertebrates. But an octopus is an invertebrate. So previously, nobody was assigning these kind of understandings of feelings and sentience in things like lobsters and things like octopuses. And actually now, legally speaking, they have these animal welfare protections.
Do they? So already, with nothing changing?
No, what changed was actually, it was one philosopher at LSE, in fact, Dr. Jonathan Birch, who's this top investigator on this big animal sentience project, which is due to conclude next year. But it's already had these big legal changes in the UK, like officially by law, octopuses, crabs, lobsters are covered under the Animal Welfare Act as of 2021, when they weren't before. And you've seen the change in that already. Now there's rules about boiling lobsters. Like if you boil them live before you eat them, for example, now you have to stun them.
But that to me seems like it's about pain, though. And that to me seems like a different thing, but maybe I'm misunderstanding the word sentience. So describe what sentience is in this context,
so
then.
Sentience has nothing to do with intelligence. I think that's the really key thing to take away from this. We're not talking about how intelligent an octopus or anything else is, although octopuses are unbelievably intelligent as far as the tests we have go. They've been observed using tools in the wild. They can problem solve, all things that we thought only apes could do up until quite recently. But sentience means the ability to feel, like to have body sensations. It doesn't mean like you have the capacity to reflect on your emotions. Like, we're not saying that octopuses feel empathy for others, and we're not saying they're not. What we are saying is that there's compelling evidence that all of these vertebrates and lots of invertebrates do feel pain. And if that's the assumption, which is what the declaration last Friday is saying, we're upending the assumption. If the baseline now is we're assuming all these animals can feel pain, we're not saying that you're not allowed to eat them. We already knew that dogs could feel pain, and plenty of countries still eat dog, for example, or birds or chickens. It's more, how should that affect how we legislate? How should that affect considerations of welfare, of ethics? Basically, we can't just ignore all this scientific evidence that's been coming in the last 20 years anymore.
Jess, how should it affect how we legislate?
I mean, I think that it should really be taken into consideration when it comes to things, for example, like, of course, my issue is climate change, so I always bring it back to the climate. And when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how we're considering how we're going to feed the world for the next 20, 30 years. You know, it's estimated that the world's going to add like 2 billion people by 2050. As policymakers are thinking about the best ways to feed all of those people sustainably, should we be considering the fact that maybe we want to do a bit less agricultural farming of animals, right? Agriculture is a huge contributor to climate change with its emissions and its land use. And so do we want to maybe try to prioritize animal welfare alongside reducing emissions while trying to feed the world? And interestingly, those two things overlap. One of the ideas that's put forward for policymakers to consider in ways to feed the world better is to reduce meat consumption so that the land that we use to farm all of the food that we feed to all the animals that we then eat, that we can use that land to feed humans. So we could put new crops there rather than farming all these animals that are emitting things into the atmosphere that are killing us. Why don't we use that land to grow crops that can feed humans? So it's interesting to me, this idea that the two things can be coupled, right? That we can actually do things that are better for animals that are also better for us and for the environment. So I think hopefully maybe that can help inform policy going forward.
And some of the solutions to climate change have involved, for example, eating more insects, haven't they? Mm-hmm. And insects are implicated in this declaration, so that might change.
Yeah, you could look at regulating insect farming the way you do with battery chicken farming. We're not saying people are going to stop eating chickens, but maybe battery farming chickens isn't the best, most ethical way to do it.
Emma?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of goes back to what I was saying before, in that we can sort of understand maybe seamless, octopuses. I think we established that octopuses was the plural, that they have, the ability to use tools. So maybe the sentience isn't hugely surprising, but then, the study assigns it to insects and other reptiles as well, snakes, which I think does sort of cast a large amount of as Jess says, push to sort of have more environmentally friendly diets and stuff like that is pushing towards eating more fish, more insects. But obviously there's this consideration as well. And I mean, there's also the consideration around, scientific research. I mean, obviously, research which is cruel to animals has always been either outlawed or been very unpopular. But now it's sort of like even sort of tests which don't cause harm to animals. It's about how does it make that research more difficult? Because any sort of like testing on animals which are sentient, does that count as cruel? It's an interesting study, and it does raise a lot of interesting questions.
If you work in an industry that involves animals, though, Harriet, you might just sort of see this document, this New York Declaration, as just more bureaucratic red tape coming your way, really. I mean, the final paragraph of what they've written: when there is a realistic possibility of conscious experience in an animal, it's irresponsible to ignore that possibility in decisions affecting that animal. We should consider welfare risks and use the evidence to inform our responses to these risks. I mean, if you're a, langoustine farmer or something, what does that actually mean to what you're going to do? You think, oh, okay, well, these things have sentience, now what?
But we do that with everything else, though. With everything else, we use the available scientific evidence to assess the risk.
But what does a risk assessment on a tank full of shrimp look like? I suppose that's what I'm getting at.
First of all, it's not bureaucratic red tape if it's philosophers and scientists. They're basically saying, as far as we know, based on the scientific evidence, this is the assumption. So stop ignoring that, basically. And I don't think there's anything necessarily radical about saying to anyone, whether that be like a Langoustine farmer or a policymaker or just an average person, you can't ignore what all the available evidence is now suggesting to be true. It's irresponsible. So they're not saying that laws have to change, although it's worth saying that the US is already considering whether to apply these animal welfare rules to octopuses. That's already in motion. But it's not like legislating. I think it's key to say that this declaration is more about saying this new nascent area of study that's really only like 20 years old. Because obviously people wondering about whether animals could feel or not goes back as old as people, as old as animals, as old as we've all lived together. But this scientific study, like the scientific analysis of how you measure that, can you measure it, and what metrics do you measure it with, that's like less than 20 years old.
And experts from all over the world as well, Jess. I'm just looking through the list of who's been a signatory to this declaration. You know, New York University, LSE, Tel Aviv, Belfast, Sorbonne, it goes on. Is there value in that, in people from all over the world coming together to sign a thing? Does that give it more weight?
Yes, undoubtedly, yes. It's not partisan. It's not a nationalist issue. It's a global issue. And I think the coming together of scientists and researchers and experts and philosophers from across the world to really throw their weight behind it lends credibility to it and also helps to expand the message globally, right? So it's not just something that's going out in the US or in the UK, but it's going out across the world. So yes, absolutely. When you're talking about scientific research or messages like this, having a global coalition behind them makes them stronger. Absolutely.
Is anyone going to change their behaviour as a result of this news, though, on the panel today?
I'm already a vegetarian, and I'm very like, animals have feelings, so.
Oh, that's a really good question, though. I think it's a really good question, because I'm not a vegetarian. I eat plenty of meat. I eat octopus. I would eat insects happily. And I also have pets, and I'm very, very keen on animals. And I think the reason that I picked this story is not to tell people that it means that we should all be vegetarians. And it's not to tell people that you shouldn't step on an insect because it's going to feel a scream of pain. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is if the assumption now is that all these animals have consciousness, they have feeling, then what does that mean for humans? Like, what's the implication for humans? Like, what is it that makes us different? And these are questions that are also being asked about artificial intelligence now. Like, what is human and what isn't? What is it that makes us special anymore if all animals are conscious?
Okay, I'm going to work on the basis that all of our audience are sentient beings and therefore move us on. Jessica, you're up next after this. Are you looking for an antidote to information overload? Well, at a time when the news cycle is moving faster than ever, The Week is here to help. Our new digital subscription includes a twice-daily digest of the day's most interesting, important stories, along with the liveliest comment and analysis delivered to your app or inbox. Head to theweek.com/offer and use the code SPRING24. That's SPRING24 at theweek.com/offer. Sale ends 6th of May. Okay, Jess, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, the IEA tried to calm the EV jitters.
In the last few years, we have seen an extraordinary increase of electric car sales around the world. Having said that, we also read a lot of news, mostly bad news, about the situation of the electric car sales and their penetration around the world. Therefore, I believe our annual report, Global Energy Vehicle Outlook, is a good source to see those news versus the data.
Fatih Birol, Executive Director of the IEA, on the release of the Global EV Outlook 2024. That was on Tuesday. Jess, what is the IEA and what is the Global EV Outlook?
Yes. Okay. So the IEA stands for the International Energy Agency.
Right.
And this is a widely respected intergovernmental organization. And they were started in 1974 after the 1973 oil crisis. And the idea was that they were set up to help promote global energy security. And they do this by working with member nations. So the countries that they work with send them data and information about what's going on in their countries in terms of energy supply, demand, and the IEA uses this data to help produce reports that inform policy, look for problems that might be coming down the line, and help project into the future and say, this is where we're going with our energy supply and demand and what the trends are. And basically, policymakers, journalists, leaders, they all look to the IEA for insight into things on oil demand, but also in this instance, the demand for electric vehicles. This week, the IEA's Global EV Outlook came out for 2024, and this is a report talking about what the data suggests is happening with EV demand now and what is going to happen in the near future into the next decade or so. And so this week they came out and said, right now, EV demand is stable and demand is going to continue to grow and surge in the next decade.
Stable and will continue to grow and surge. Is that a surprise? That doesn't sound like a surprise to me.
I think that it is a surprise if you are looking at short-term trends, right? So there have been a lot of sort of angsty headlines lately in the media about how various prominent electric vehicle manufacturers have seen sales growth drop, right? So this means that the pace at which sales were growing for electric vehicles, that has leveled out and maybe started to fall a little bit.
So the early adopters have got one, basically, and not enough people are coming along to try it out.
Yeah, that's one reason. Yeah, so there was this huge push for EVs, this big surge in demand. There were loads of subsidies that came in, and a lot of that has started to sort of peter out a little bit. So yes, they've hit the very wealthy people who could afford the first generation of electric vehicles, the sort of enthusiasts. And now the problem is that they're going to have to reach into the general public and try and reach the mass market of people who may be a bit more hesitant. So that is the sort of short-term trend, and the IEA recognizes that, yes, that is a short-term trend. However, what they're saying is long-term, and not even that long, into 2030 or 2035, they say that demand is going to surge. And I'll just give you some numbers here. So they said that based on right now, EV sales grew by 25% in the first 3 months of this year, right? So that's a positive trend. And then they say that more than 1 in 5 cars sold globally this year will be electric. So they're trying to reassure the market. They're trying to say, listen, despite what you see in the headlines and, short term, panic, this is still a thing that's happening, and what it does is it signals to EV makers and to consumers and policymakers, like, this is going in the right direction. It's not going to stop anytime soon. And we can kind of talk about why that is. But it's reassuring at a time when everyone is sort of freaking out and, doubts are starting to creep in about whether or not the EV revolution that was so promised is in fact going to happen.
Okay. So I guess, Emma, the reason that I said I wasn't surprised is just as a layman, I'm not surprised that in the long term electric vehicles are going to go up because it's actually been legislated for. We're not going to be able to buy petrol and diesel cars, are we? So, of course, eventually when people replace their cars, they're going to get EVs. But I'm not surprised either that in the short term there's been this blip that Jess is talking about the markets needing reassurance over because, and I'm talking, I realise, here mainly about Britain, it's different around the world, but it's very obvious that the infrastructure is not there at the moment for everyone to have an electric car.
No, and I mean, it's certainly the case in Britain, as you mentioned, but it's in the rest of the world outside of China. It's a fairly similar story. I mean, if we take Britain, for example, there's currently no form of government subsidy or incentive to buy or produce electric vehicles. This week, the House of Lords has a bill which suggested, the government should reduce electric vehicle prices. Introduced a bill, but this was rejected by Rishi Sunak's government. And the UK has not had a government incentive or subsidy towards buying electric vehicles since the plug-in car grant was axed in June 2022. So certainly, in terms of the short term, it's not hugely surprising that there hasn't been a huge surge in electric vehicles on our roads because the government support simply hasn't been there.
But also, just as a driver, Harriet, it's just not that practical if you live, for example, in a city and you don't have your own driveway. I mean, you're not allowed to dangle cables across the road to charge your car, are you? And there's only so many charging stations to go around. I mean, that hasn't been worked out yet.
Yeah, I mean, as Emma said, it's absolutely true that the charging infrastructure in the UK has really not kept up with the demand. And as you said, the way that they're going to start legislating, you won't be able to buy a non-electronic car after 2030. We're really hoping that by then they'll have sorted this out. But as Emma mentioned, this is a much bigger story than just Britain. Like, when we talk about the global EV market, we're not talking about Britain, and we're not actually really even talking about the US. I mean, I was astonished when I read the statistic that I'll read out that last year Chinese car makers accounted for more than half of all electronic car sales, and in China more than 60% of cars sold were electric. So in China, it's already cheaper to get an electronic vehicle than it is to get a diesel or petrol vehicle, and that is a really massive driver in the global market. And why that is so interesting, and it's all to do with lithium. And this is like one of my absolute favorite like pet topics to talk about.
The enthusiasm on your face. Not since the sentience of crabs have you looked so happy.
It's basically in China's interests to flood the market with super cheap electronic cars to drive demand, basically to drive down prices. And the reason for that is because these electronic vehicles need these batteries, which are mostly made of lithium, which is this metal. It's the same battery that's in your phone or in your tablet or whatever. Most of the world's lithium is actually mined in South America, so mined in Chile, Bolivia, Argentina, this amazing triangle of lithium in South America and Western Australia. But most of it is refined in China. So actually, the lithium is turned into batteries in China, in gigafactories, and most of it, more than, I think, 70% of the world's lithium is refined in China. And that means that all over the world, even if we find our own lithium supplies, which we have in Cornwall, there's some in Canada, but there's nothing we can do about it because our infrastructure, our mining, our refining capacity hasn't kept pace at all. So what that means is that we're all basically dependent on China for these lithium-ion batteries, which is really not good from a geopolitical perspective. We don't really want to be reliant on China for something that we're all going to need in the future. And Elon Musk, he's right when he said that lithium access was the choke point on the future of the EV industry. But obviously, as we'll talk about in a minute, Elon Musk has a pretty vested interest in saying that.
What role might Chinese automakers have then, Jess, when it comes to the rest of the world? If half of all EV sales or whatever Harriet said as the stat are in China, that's the domestic market at the moment, isn't it? But could it be that because they're able to make the entire car more cheaply because they're doing the lithium processing there, that we all end up driving Chinese branded cars too?
Yes. It is very possible. I mean, it depends on where they sell their cars. I mean, in America, you're not allowed to buy a Chinese EV, and
is that right?
Yeah. I mean, you're not allowed to. So BYD, which is the top electric vehicle maker in the world, or it was, and then it was Tesla, and then it was BYD. Like, it goes back and forth. The incredible low price of Chinese EVs. Many of them are already at price parity or below the cost of internal combustion vehicles in China. And that low price will trickle out across the rest of the world and drive EV prices down elsewhere. And so that is coming. And because of the sheer scale at which they're producing these EVs and selling them, it is inevitable that those will become the least expensive cars, and therefore everybody else will be trying to keep up with them and drive the price down and down and down. So that and in a way that's actually quite good, because if we want people to buy EVs, they have to be more affordable. They just have to. They are too expensive now. Almost no one that is within the sort of general market can afford to ditch their used Nissan Note, which is what I have, for a brand new Tesla.
I'm in exactly that position. I would have wanted an electric car by preference, then looked into it and ended up with a big guzzling diesel thing because it was much cheaper.
Yes, and so there has to be the cost incentive for people to buy them. So in that sense, the EV market in China is a huge influence on global trends, absolutely.
But it is good news then, isn't it, Emma, that in the long term, it looks like people might be able to afford EVs who currently can't? I mean, we do all need to have one ultimately, which is why that legislation's there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to follow off what Jess said, the price point of electric vehicles in the best of the world is currently so ridiculous that it's cheaper to buy a Chinese car pretty much anywhere else in the world. Like, for example, there's this stat in this Al Jazeera explainer that I found this week, which said that a Dolphin Mini from Chinese manufacturer BYD costs $21,000 to buy in Mexico, compared to $27,000 for a Chevrolet Bolt or $29,000 for a Nissan Leaf. So if it's cheaper to buy a Chinese car, which is then, even though it has to be transported halfway all the way across the world, than it is to buy a electric car made in the country next door, then I think you're realising how much of an issue there is with price points of electric vehicles outside of China currently.
I was just going to say whether maybe people now will be taking holidays to buy electric cars, like people go to get their teeth done and their hairline done in Turkey, but then that's not very environmentally friendly flying to Mexico to buy a car, is it? So if your concerns are saving the world, that's maybe a skewed way to go about doing it.
Yeah, it's rather self-defeating.
Harriet?
Well, I thought what was really interesting about this story was that the narrative that we've all kind of internalized with these headlines, and we're responsible for them too at The Week. We've published a bunch of articles with headlines like, "Are electric vehicle sales losing their charge?" And then actually in the piece explained, no, very much not. I think the narrative is interesting because the data doesn't bear it out at all. Like, yes, as they said, the growth, the speed of the growth might be slowing, but ultimately, eventually everyone will be driving an electronic vehicle. That seems to be not in question. It may take a lot of time, it may take less time than we think, based on improvements to charging infrastructure, based on improvements to batteries, improvements like emissions caps, for example, all these things. But what we do know is that it's going to end up in a place where everyone's driving an electric vehicle eventually. The problem with that is what that looks like, because if most people, as it seems to be projected, will be driving a Chinese electric vehicle, that creates the situation where if China corners the market like a sort of global Tesla, that's a really, really, really big problem. Like, we don't want to be reliant on China for something that everybody has to drive. Like, already Chinese car sales, I mean, they're expected to absolutely boom this year. And if Chinese car makers can drive down the price to the point that all these British car makers go out of business, or all these US car makers, I mean, there's only one functioning lithium mine in the US. We've got a bunch of lithium in Cornwall, but we can't really do much with it because we don't have the capacity to refine it. So basically, we could end up in a situation where China has this unbelievably outsized influence globally, more than it already does, because they're the only ones that are providing the cars that everyone's driving.
I mean, in America, Jess, the states aren't going to allow that situation to arise, are they? Where they're completely dependent on China.
No. And the Biden-Harris administration has worked really hard to try and prevent that. They are providing real incentives to auto manufacturers to bring their manufacturing stateside. And you see this, lots of companies are opening new U.S. manufacturing plants, expanding their operations. You also see incredible innovations that are coming out, right? So like battery innovations, this idea of like trying to wean us off the like lithium-ion battery, coming up with new ideas for how we could charge our electric vehicles. There's lots of different irons in the fire to try and make sure that we're not entirely dependent on China. And it's actually driving innovation. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's one amazing statistic that came out. Goldman Sachs recently forecast that the cost of EV batteries will drop by 40% by 2025, which is just incredible. And EV batteries are one of the most expensive, heaviest parts of the electric vehicle. So when those prices come down, that is when we will really start to see it be possible for the cost of EVs in general to decrease.
I guess there's also a fashion point in the States as well, isn't there? Possibly. I was looking at the sales of the Ford electric pickup truck, and they've been disappointing. And as far as I can tell, that's basically because the kind of people who buy a pickup truck don't want to drive an EV at the moment.
Oh, it's so difficult to figure out how to target the right market. I was speaking to an expert a few months ago for a different story, and I was telling them how I have a family member who loves their pickup truck in the Midwest, and I don't know that I'll ever convince them to get an electric vehicle. And he said, listen, if you can get that person behind the wheel of a Ford Lightning electric pickup truck, they will learn immediately that it is far more powerful. I mean, the acceleration is more powerful. Some of those vehicles can actually like charge your home, power your home. And so, yeah, a lot of it is a branding issue. A lot of it is just like getting people out of their vehicles that they've had for years. What I find really fascinating about this moment is that we all know that we're in a transition moment. We will only be in electric vehicles in, however many decades, 3 decades maybe. But right now it's a transition. It's a huge transition. And like watching that happen and play out in real time, I just find so fascinating.
Good. All right. Thank you for that. Emma, you're up next after this. Okay, Emma, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, Algeria got shirty in their row with Morocco.
The sound of Moroccan football team RS Berkane arriving in Algeria after being accosted by local customs officers last Friday. Why were they stopped, Emma, and what's your story?
So those are the players of RS Berkane who were travelling to Algiers for the first leg of their semi-final of the CAF Confederation Cup, CAF, the Confederation of African Football. They were stopped at the airport in Algiers because their kit has caused a diplomatic row between Morocco and Algeria.
Their football shirt?
Their football shirt, yes, which features dead centre in the middle of it, a picture of an extended map of Morocco, which includes the disputed territory of Western Sahara. Algeria were not happy about Moroccan teams having a shirt with this map on it. CAF had to intervene and said that the game should be played with Berkane wearing those shirts. But then, when the match was due to take place on Sunday, RS Berkane chose not to come out of their changing room to play the match, and the match had to be cancelled.
Okay, and just to be clear, the reason that Algeria are upset is because they are the country, are they, that are disputing that bit of Western Sahara? They're fighting over it.
Yes, so Morocco annexed the territory of Western Sahara in 1975, and it has been an ongoing cause of diplomatic tension between Algeria and Morocco ever since, to the extent that Algeria severed all diplomatic ties with Morocco in 2021. And the government in exile of Western Sahara, known as the Polisario Front, they are currently in exile in Algeria. So it is very much a sore topic between Morocco and Algeria, these North African neighbours, which bubbled over this week.
So I guess the question is, Harriet, what was that map doing on their football shirt if it's disputed territory, right? Either it's just there because they're patriotic and they believe that's their country and it's a natural thing to put on your shirt, or it's there deliberately to piss off the Algerians, in which case this seems like an impolite thing to have on your football shirt if you know that it's going to cause this result. Which do you think it is?
Do you know what? I really don't know. I really, really, really don't know. And I don't think that there's any way that we're going to be able to establish definitively the reasoning. But I will say that it really reminds me of when Barbie was banned in Vietnam because of that scene with the map showing the disputed South China Sea territory, the 9-dash map, which obviously China claims that it has claim over and Vietnam disputes. And it caused this massive uproar all over Southeast Asia, and the film was banned in Vietnam. I think the point that I think is the key to take away from this is that you can't divorce a national team's football strip for the kit from politics, from money, from geopolitics, from the sponsorship. There's so much thought that goes into these kits and so much of the decision making process, and there's been so many controversies because it's something that everyone's going to see. I mean, I don't believe that any of these designs are done by accident.
Well, it sounds a bit like you're falling down on the side of it is done on purpose then, like it is done to stoke things up. If you know that there's disputed territory in the map.
I don't know if we can say that it's done deliberately to annoy the other team, although I would imagine that there are a lot of people who will think that, and that's almost good enough, if you see what I mean.
I mean, there's another side to this as well, Jess, which I saw on social media, so from inside the locker rooms where they never left, which was a photo of shirts that had been provided for them for the visiting team by the Algerians, which were replacement shirts which didn't have the map on, as kind of salt in the wound. I mean, again, I can sort of see both sides there, can't you? From Algeria's point of view, you're thinking, well, if they're going to come here and play, they can't wear those shirts, so here's one they can wear that's exactly the same in every other way apart from the thing that's going to upset people. But from their point of view, they're stripping away, the element of patriotism from their shirt, and it would be a massive insult.
Yeah, I mean, I think Harriet's absolutely right. This idea that, like, it's really interesting to think about how the kit that you wear as a sports team can be so influential, and the fascinating ways that they've been used to spread information and to draw attention to campaigns. I mean, you see this sort of everywhere, which is why I sort of lean towards, like, probably it was a deliberate decision, and fair enough, and you can understand why they would take that decision, because the number of people who see the kit is huge. Like, sports is one of the biggest ways to reach people. So many people consume sports and watch it on TV and stuff. So it's a huge messaging platform. It's a huge advertising platform. And you've seen this in various other places, whether it's raising awareness about social justice issues or raising awareness of, like, Black Lives Matter. Remember in the States when the Black Lives Matter movement was sort of at its peak in 2020, there were teams within the NFL and the NBA that were wearing Black Lives Matter slogans on their jerseys and on their helmets. And this has even been used in the climate world recently. Last year, the Reading Football Club wore their home kit, and on the sleeve it featured what are known as the warming stripes, which were designed by a professor from the University of Reading, and it's a visual representation of every year of warming. So every year gets a color, and the warmer it gets, the more red it is, and the cooler it is, the more blue it is. And it's this beautiful representation of how the climate is getting warmer. And they put that on their sleeves as a sort of way to raise the conversation among viewers. And then also, I read recently that the Japanese Olympics team is going to be putting the carbon footprint of their kit on their kit. So, like, every item of clothing will have a number, and that will represent, like, how much carbon was emitted into the atmosphere.
Like a calorie count.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah, but it's a sort of, like, I mean, it's virtue signaling, but it's also, like, keeping it in the front of minds.
Also going to decimate their sales.
Well, yeah, maybe. I don't know if they'll be sold on, like, I don't know if they'll be featured on
the souvenir replica ones.
On the souvenirs. It's just on what they're wearing.
Anytime in the gift shop you're forced to ask the question, "Do I need this?" The answer's always going to be no, isn't it?
No.
But Emma, with this, like, a picture of a nation, a map, isn't that something that the Confederation of African Football, CAF, you mentioned earlier, could have weighed in on earlier, before this situation came to a head? They could have just had a rule, which is, given there's disputed territory across Africa, let's not have maps of regions on our shirts.
They could have, but they didn't. And that kit with the extended Moroccan map, and if you haven't seen the kit, you really could not miss the extended map. It is right there in the centre of the shirt. It's a very clear sort of, like, statement. But CAF allowed they can play in those shirts throughout the entirety of the competition, which is a fairly significant competition as well, the CAF Confederation Cup. It's one of the top Africa-wide competitions for club football teams, so it's a fairly significant platform. And I think it's exemplifying the fact that Morocco's claim over Western Sahara is widely simply accepted across Africa and across the world as well. Western Sahara has been called Africa's last colony, but it is very much, under Moroccan control for economic reasons primarily. It has huge amounts of good quality fishing territory and phosphate mines, which is why Morocco has staked a claim and annexed the territory for so long. But it's obviously a situation that CAF could have headed off because of the possibility that this Moroccan team could have played an Algerian team, but they didn't, because outside of Morocco and this part of the world, it's not an issue which catches a lot of attention or is viewed as being particularly controversial in other parts of the world, or even in other parts of Africa.
Okay, let's have a bit of fun in the final few minutes of the show. In preparation for this story, Emma, you forwarded through to us a couple of articles which kind of rounded up great football shirt cock-ups of years gone by. Does anyone have a favourite they'd like to pick out for us?
Oh yeah, no, I think that the Cameroon one is really, really, really funny because they obviously wear the sleeveless vest for the African Cup of Nations in 2002, and they kind of got away with it. But then a couple of years later, they tried to do it for the 2006 World Cup. They had like a onesie, like a top and shorts attached onesie, and then FIFA stepped in and were like, no, absolutely not. We're going to fine you. We're going to deduct points from the group stages. We cannot be having this. And I can see why, but I do think the sleeveless vests need to make a comeback.
Jess, you're frowning. You're looking through the article now.
Yeah, no, I am. There's one that's like a muscle kit. It shows like the internal muscle system. And it just looks like, it reminds me of Lady Gaga's meat dress. I mean, it's just awful. You don't want to look at that when you're watching a sport. Come on, guys.
Isn't the most famous one the United away kit in 1995? The grey one that the teammates, they blended in with the crowd and they couldn't kind of see each other, and it was awful, and they actually ditched it at halftime and came back out against Southampton 3-0 down in their home kit in a different kit because it was that bad.
I think that was Sir Alex Ferguson making a certain amount of excuses for his side being 3-0 down at half-time against Southampton. Also, the muscle kit was a Spanish team, CD Palencia, in 2016, and it is truly gross.
It's atrocious.
Yeah,
I quite like it.
The
ketchup kit as well. That's called the ketchup kit. There's kind of like an artsy one.
What about the one with the massive swastika on it? Like, what was Fiorentina thinking with that one?
They say they didn't notice that it had a swastika. It had a sort of gridlock pattern of lines, didn't it, that could form a swastika if isolated. Okay, I can tell that they're coming for your meeting room, Emma, so just before we let you go, why is this your story of the week? Why does it matter?
I think it is very interesting how people who say that football and politics, should be kept separate, I think that that's always utterly impossible. And I think that this is another example of how football and even things like football kits can draw us into these political debates and sort of like make us sort of, be sort of a microcosm of the societies in which we live now. I mean, we saw it fairly recently with England with the Flaggate kit, or how
it's Nike redrawing the St George's Cross with extra colours.
Yes, yeah. The playful update of the St George's Cross, which sent the British public into a tiz for about 2 days, British media more accurately, and I think that this is another example of how through the medium of football, through the medium of football kits, you can provide like a microcosm of national identity, of cultural identity, and throw it into sharp focus, almost like nothing else can.
Well, on that, I'm going to playfully update the script like Nike redrawing the St George's Cross on the England football kit, and issue my thanks to Harriet, Emma and Jess. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcast and tap follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription when you go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Ollie Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio, and until we meet again to unwrap next week, they think it's all over. Bye-bye.